All right. Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Black Ronins of Japan. I'm your host, Sick Jones. My co-host is Shinobi brother, Kitagakure Jones in the background. First and foremost, just want to give a shout out to our subscribers. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in. We truly appreciate the love and support. 日本の観客のために YouTube のブラックロニンシリーズへようこそ。もうありがとうございました。Hope you fellas are doing well tonight. It is September the 19th, 2020. In other places in the world, it is September the 20th, 2020. So things are moving up and up. Hope you guys are doing well. Y'all staying safe out there and being about your business. Doing what you got to do to get your mind right, get your money right, get your body right. So, without further ado, let me bring on the illustrious brother of mine that I am so honored to call him my shinobi brother, none other than Mr. Kirigakure Jones. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
はい、ありがとうございます。こんばんは、皆様。Peace to the panel, peace to the chat, Osamarai-san, and to our Japanese listeners. 日本人の皆さん、Black Ronins of Japan のシリーズようこそよろしくお願いします。
Hi. So, my brother, how's it been going for you lately?
Oh man, it's been pretty good. It's been great weather. I'm always amazed when I'm just out and about here in Pleasantville on these streets. It's like I see all these happy brothers walking around, and it's like never the same brothers twice. It's always like new brothers with their stargates from various cultures and their children walking around. I see a lot of brothers walking around or driving around actually in their Range Rovers, their Beamers. They're happy. They're living their best lives, so that's always a wonderful thing to see. And also, just before this conversation got started, there was some rumbling going on another panel, and they called your boy out.
Really?
They're like, Kitty Gakane Jones on the panel.
Oh my
But
goodness.
Shinobi is elusive.
Yeah, I'm about to say, that's one character they're going to have a hard time trying to get in everything because as
That's
the
right.
shinobi way of life, you do things in secret. So good luck with that. Not even a samurai can hardly track down a shinobi, that's for sure. But speaking of quality Stargaze, so definitely, out here on the West Coast too, brothers are just getting something different, doing something different, and I mean they're just living that life, and I think it's beneficial for any brother that really wants to maximize their potential and everything that they deal with quality stargates that help them to get there. That support from the background definitely goes a long way. And definitely later on, we'll probably have an episode where we talk about the quality stargates from the land of the rising sun. But
Mm-hmm.
definitely, that's one thing we want to emphasize that when you're either a shinobi, like my brother Kitagakure, or you're going down the path of the samurai ronin, like myself, it's good that you have a supporting cast behind you that no matter what, they're willing to go above and beyond for the likes of you.
That's facts, especially in this world that we live in. Things are crazy nowadays, so it never hurts to have additional options. Because you never know when you might have to make a move or change something up or do something different.
Very true, very true. And before we get started, get into the meat of this episode,
Of the
I figured I
video.
figured I'd give guys a little treat tonight. So the song that you just heard is actually from a group of Japanese women who played the shamisen, and their group is called Key and Key. And so I just recently started listening to them for far as the music and all. And I have to say, they're pretty good. But as far as the aesthetics of these wonderful ladies, I have to say that they're definitely easy on the eyes.
Hmm. So what's it called? It's Key and Key, like Ki and Ki. Is that how you find them?
Yeah, yeah, they're called Key and Key. I forgot how they pronounce their name, but they shortened their name down to Kiki, and they
Hmm.
played the shamisen, which is the Japanese version of the guitar. And so the music that we just heard
Oh, I see
is
it.
one of her.
Yeah, I found them. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
So the music that we just heard is actually one of their songs called "New Beginnings," which I find it very fitting for this particular episode once we get into it.
Yeah.
But for the brothers out there who want to know what would a quality Stargate look like on average from the land of rising sun, here you go.
There we go. Man. And I'm thinking because some of the brothers in the chat are mentioning the pure chaos going on another live stream, and it's like, man, this is such an oasis, far away from that kind of mentality. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I earlier today I was actually on a panel with Xanatos Clutch and King Sigma, and we was talking about how for a lot of brothers moving forward, we definitely got to start having a little bit more diversity in our content. And what I
yeah,
mean by that is, yeah, of course, it's okay to kind of talk every now and then about what goes on in Ebony America and some of the things that may affect us in that regard. But to be honest with you, to me, I find more gratification in watching brothers and their content talking about the things that makes them happy. To me, you could just feel the authentication when they go on those type of topics and subjects. And so that's why with this particular series, the Black Ronins of Japan, this is a subject where for the both of us, we can share our intellect and what Japan means to us and still means to us, and how the next brother that's listening out there that tunes in could listen to this, be like, you know what? Thanks to Kitagakure Jones and Sigma Jones, I'm gonna take that big leap and visit Japan for myself. And to me, if that gets your motor running and everything, we've done our job.
exactly. And I agree with that. Like, at this point, I think I've covered all the major topics relating to a certain area, a certain tribe, if you will. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
from here on out, I want to branch out into more meaningful topics. Like, the Black Lonins is destined to be a classic. So 50 years from now, and these younger brothers, man, I have to salute the younger brothers, man, especially the millennials and Gen Zs. They are just out there not caring what anybody says. They're doing them, and I'm happy to see it because, you've got a big world that you can choose from. You can learn, you can decide what fits best in your lifestyle and your opinion. You can get on a plane once this whole, beer bug situation gets taken care of, and you can go, and no one's going to hold you back but you.
Exactly. Speaking of that too, I just heard some updates from Japan that they're going to start easing access for foreigners and travelers coming from America to gain them a little bit of access into Japan so they could come and travel and everything. So to me, that's just a big sign that uh, uh, things are starting to get back to normal. There's already a herd immunity as far as with the viruses and all. And then once they get a workable vaccine up and going, it's business as usual. So that's that's the thing where it's like, yep, just a few more months counting down, and then we both will be returning to the land of the rising sun. And speaking of which, we got a brother here by the name of Shozan Hanma, who says that he heard this is the place for black men who are of Japanese culture.
That's
Brother,
right.
you have come to the right place, so welcome aboard.
Welcome, welcome. I like how you phrase that too. Black men who are of Japanese culture, because that's very apropos.
Exactly. To me, I think a lot of brothers who watch us and everything, they can look at us and say, yeah, these brothers, they may be American, but how they conduct themselves, how they speak, and how they go about things in life, they are of that Japanese culture. And I would say definitely more so than the average otaku who all they know is anime and everything and not really take the time to really immerse in the true essence of the Japanese culture. And that's what this series is all about.
Agreed. And I enjoy anime as much as the next person. It's all good, but there's so much going on beneath the surface. And also, I want to congratulate Suga Sori Daijin, the new Prime Minister of Japan, because Abe Sori Daijin had to resign. So, wishing good health to Abe-san, and hopefully Prime Minister Suga, is going to be a good leader for the Japanese nation, and of course, for personal reasons. I think good ties between America and Japan will definitely continue, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more exchange going on. You know what I'm saying? As the days and weeks go by, so it'll be interesting to see what happens on that front.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I did hear him say that he plans to make Japan a lot more global. And that's
Hmm.
the key word, global,
Global.
in points of he wants to have more people involved reaching out to Japan, Japan reaching out to more people. So just by those words, it sounds like this is a prime minister who is definitely more in lines of a liberal type of Japanese rather than the whole nationalism type. And by all means, nothing wrong with the nationalism type, but so for some people, they just got to remember that if you're going to live that tribalistic life, you really set yourself back from really opening up to other cultures and people who can actually relate to you, even though we got different phenotypes. So, just by the sounds of this new prime minister, I think Japan is definitely in good hands.
Yeah, I think so. In fact, I think he was the chief cabinet secretary. So I think he was kind of behind the scenes on they didn't call it immigration. They called it, I think it was like a guest worker program or something like that. But just, Japan is, of course, hunting for people with skills and abilities. I think we've talked about this on a few occasions. They're looking for competent, qualified people.
That is true, very true. And let me tell you too, there's also some real estate involvements in the land of Japan too. There are some places in rural Japan where they would like to have people who are at least serious about the Japanese culture maybe own some real estate there too. So for the brothers out there who are really interested in the Japanese culture and really expanding their horizon, that's some potential business opportunities right there. We'll have to definitely um, do an episodes on that subject too, as far as the real estate that's going on in Japan and how brothers like us could definitely get involved and potentially leave even more of a legacy for our children and their children. The opportunities are just endless in that regard.
What's interesting about that too, I mean, a lot of these individuals, you can move out to those rural areas, but with, of course, modern technology, you could work remotely. So, I mean, you could, in theory, find yourself work that doesn't involve you living in Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
You could live maybe 30, 40 minutes outside of there, maybe in like Saitama or someplace like that. And, work, earn a living, maybe if you want to go into the city on occasion for meetings. I just think that that whole, for those who are prepared, who have the will and the skills, I think this whole beer bug situation has opened a lot of doors. And Mike Ship asked, how do I learn how to speak Japanese fluently? I would say, mada mada daze. Not yet. I'm still learning, but Let's see, I spent 4 years in college studying. I have a East Asian languages and cultures, Japanese minor. My roommates were Japanese, and my wife is Japanese. So there's just a lot of Japanese happening in my life, and that's been going on for quite a few years. So I probably learned Japanese the fastest after drinking tremendous amounts of sake and beer and just hanging out and talking with people. I think that's what helped me the most.
And I definitely concur with what Kitagakure just said. One thing I would say, if you truly want to deepen your studies in Japanese and, at least kind of get the hang of the basics of it, make friends with Japanese people, not just Japanese women. I know that's
Japanese,
too
yes.
tempting. That's too tempting, but actually go out and make friends with Japanese people. Like for me, I talk about how my first SYSBN relationship was with a Japanese woman back in my college days. But really, college was where I got a chance to really meet authentic Japanese people. And a lot of them, I made good friends with them and still talk to them on a regular basis. And so the conversations that I can have with them, even if my Japanese is not as perfect as theirs, they're more than happy to teach me more of the ropes, teach me more of the guidelines, the deeper meanings behind their language and culture, which very rarely are you going to get good at that just by reading books or taking courses online or in the classroom. To me, you will get further ahead if you make friends with those who actually live in the country that you're trying to study. So, to me, my course of action was, hey, make friends with Japanese people and get to know them better, get to know their lives and everything. And the next thing I know, I'm starting to become like one of them. My friend was telling me the other day, he lives out in Kyoto, and he was telling me, he's like, Sigma Jones, if I didn't know that you was a black man, I would think that you're just another Japanese.
That's interesting because I concur with what you said. I definitely co-sign that. Japan is a patriarchal nation that is run by men. So you definitely need, Japanese male friends if you're going to make it there. So at this point, unfortunately, I've been to funerals, I've been to weddings, get-togethers, kind of sharing the joys and the sorrows with my Japanese network, which I basically created in college also. Mike Ship is, for example, saying, I need to meet some Japanese people. I would say if you're in the US, try to volunteer to teach English through the local universities. There may be some local Japanese students that are looking for a tutor, and then that way you can start building those relationships, or maybe you could go online. But that's basically how I did it. And I wanted to also mention, because you said something pretty profound at the end. You were saying, oh yeah, okay, like your friend was saying that basically you are more and more culturally Japanese. So I've been reading a lot of comments because, Osaka Naomi-san,
Hmm.
the winner of the U.S. Open, she is Haitian and Japanese. So she's been in the news a lot lately, and she's become somewhat of a controversial figure because of her stances on various issues. But what I found to be interesting is that if you kind of go through the comments, a lot of them were basically saying, she doesn't speak Japanese. Why doesn't she speak Japanese? She could learn Japanese. Now, a lot of people on the outside will like to say things like Japan is a xenophobic country and they don't want you to learn the language or anything like that. That's been the complete opposite from my experience. The more of the language that I spoke, the more cool points that I got. And then after I married a Japanese woman, if I'm going to like social events, especially like with other families, they expect me to speak some, even though I'm a foreigner, you know what I'm saying? Or, I'm not Japanese ethnically. So I find that very interesting, that I think there's a lot of emphasis when you start building those relationships, they want you to be able to speak the language on some level.
Absolutely. And to me, that's where you as an ebony man, you have some people from the opposites, the oppositions, the tribalists and all, who will make it seem like the Japanese are racist and whatnot. Let me tell you, when you show that you are sincere about their culture and that you are putting the effort to learn the language and the culture as much as you can, you will be seen as one of them.
Yeah.
They don't take phenotype as an issue. To me, when you have that genuine authentication of becoming Japanese in their eyes, you're pretty much Japanese. And especially in the case of Kirigakure, once he had officially got married, his in-laws and friends and family members from the Japanese side, they pretty much consider him as one of them. And I'm
Yeah.
slowly starting to see a lot of that ripple effect even in my case. So yeah, it's amazing. That's definitely something that I think for any brother that's getting involved, they need to take that into consideration. So before we get started, so Shozan, he asked the question: is it possible to live in Okinawa? I've been in martial arts for years, and I love to study in the literal home of karate. Shozan, I don't know too much of what's going on in Okinawa for sure. If there are some real estate available, I would think that it'd be pretty high since Okinawa has a military base there, and besides that, it's pretty much year-round tropical weather. So think of Okinawa like a smaller version of California in that regard. But that would be
Mm.
something we could later on look into.
Yeah, that would be good. Plus, I mean, there's a long history, especially like, brothers after World War II. A lot of them basically they never went back. They just
Oh
stayed,
yeah.
and they stayed in Okinawa. They married local women, and from what I hear, there's a community there. I haven't seen them myself because I've never been that far south. The furthest south I've been is the Kansai Kyoto area, but
Mm.
I hear that some of their descendants might still be there to this day. I'm not sure if you can confirm that or not.
That's true. We'll definitely have to look more into it. But with that said, let us get to the main subject of this particular episode.
You
And this is actually a subject that yours truly Kirigakure wanted to talk about, and I feel like it's a great subject to kind of really get into one of the essence of Japanese culture, and that is Zen and meditation.
Indeed, indeed. I didn't find any articles or anything. I mean, I can pull some up real quick, but um,
Oh,
I wanted to talk about this because we have an eye on the past and as well as the modern day. And salute to Logic's finest in the building. But
yes, salute to him.
salute. I feel like it's very difficult to truly master, say, the Japanese martial arts without kind of knowing the religious and philosophical concepts behind them. So, just as an example, for my Ninpo study, my Taijutsu study, the more I mastered Japanese culture, the better my physical technique became. And
Mm.
the same thing with, the more I kind of got into the philosophical and the spiritual aspects of it, the better my technique. So, for example, I would go to our hombu, our headquarters, and train, and usually about a week at a time. And I would come back to the US. And what people would tell me is that my technique was more ghost. In other words, I didn't have to apply as much strength. I would use more subtle movements. I would kind of play with that. How do you stay in and out of the opponent's line of sight? Things like that. All these kind of things. So I think to truly understand, the samurai or the shinobi, I think it's very important to take a quick look at some of those. JJ Wilson says, "Ghost like Jinsa Kai-san." Totally. Yeah, because like I'm a tall guy and I'm a slim guy, so I'm not like 300 pounds or anything like that. But people were having a hard. I mean, people like try to bear hug me and all that stuff, and I would just slip out. Like they would want to grab me, but I would be just out of reach. And this was basically after 1 week of serious training and meditation in Japan land. So I think that's very important to kind of get that full aspect of it. But anyway, go ahead, brother.
Oh no, not at all. You're more far ahead in the Japanese culture than I am. Because right now, the only training person that I'm getting is actually through my taiko drumming in Odaiko. So at the moment, that's my only means of learning somewhat of the martial arts until once the beer bug has been under control and then people are able to converge. Then from there, I'll be able to start going through the samurai training that my sensei has linked me to a certified samurai sensei. And
Hmm.
so that's, to me, that's where I'll really get to see where I'm at as far as techniques, as far as what I can start working on and whatnot. Because in my case, I kind of still have my football body, more like a lineman type of body and
Hmm.
whatnot. It's definitely a lot more in shape than any big guy and whatnot. But still, there's still some weight that needs to be trimmed down and everything. But my sensei was saying, Odaiko sensei, that with my size, if I'm able to polish a little bit of my skills and everything, I could definitely be a deadly warrior because my sheer size would be hard for any opponent. It's kind of like he says that just my appearance alone could scare off an opponent. And I, it is funny he mentioned it because actually, when I was playing football back in my high school days and all, the nickname they actually gave me was Gravedigger because I actually, on one particular play, this is a little story time. There was a kickoff that I was in. I was blocking for the receiving team. And let's just say in one play alone, I actually knocked out two people.
Wow.
They were decommissioned for the rest of the game. So that's how I earned the nickname Gravedigger. But my sensei, Odaiko sensei, is like, yeah, you have this presence to where, you know, anybody who sees you and all, they have to think twice if they really want to come after you. So it's like,
Mm.
okay, all right. So, you know, that's another thing that intrigues me too, because it's like when you hear about the legends of the ways of the samurai and everything and how the presence can scare off people and make them think twice, it's almost kind of like, I'm somewhat halfway there if what my sensei saying is true. So it just like builds more upon itself.
And what comes along with that though, especially like if you're training here locally or if you go to Japan, I hate to even bring this up, but if you're like a physical alpha getting physical, bruh, you're gonna have to beat them off with the stick. Bro. That's why I had to train in secret. I didn't want anybody to, because I don't know what it is. It's like, you know, they sense the manliness. They can sense oh, this is a guy that, like, when we talked about Bushido, this is a guy that can survive.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's a big detour. But go ahead, brother. I'm sorry.
Oh no, no, I actually think of the same thing. I was like, you know, and it's something you mentioned because with my last trip to Japan last year, I had people that were really like amazed looking at me and everything, and I was just like, at first I was like, why are they looking at me and all? But as I studied their facial expressions, it was almost like a look of curiosity, and the more they look, it was also a look of intrigue.
Hmm.
And to me, it was
Hmm.
kind of like, huh. So my presence is starting to get noticed even from far away. Now, definitely I don't have the ninja or the shinobi senses and all, because I had the occasion where a Japanese woman was actually stalking me at a mall in Tokyo, and she
See,
said
they're
she was
not,
stalking me. She was
brother.
stalking me
I
for
don't mean
30
to,
minutes.
bro, bro. I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is the thing that people aren't prepared for. That they don't know what to do with it. Getting stalked, and not only that, but getting stalked by something fine.
Exactly. So I definitely was not prepared for that, because I was like, wait, 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 wait. You've been watching me for 30 minutes? And
30
she's like,
minutes.
yeah, yeah. You was interesting and all. And I just couldn't help but just keep watching you. And it was like, at that time, I didn't know if I should have been excited or concerned. But I then had to remind myself, hey man, this is Japan. This is what you wanted. And I was like, yeah, indeed, this is actually something I wanted to experience, and or behold, I've experienced it.
Well, the other thing is too, when they put they're going to put the armor on you at some point, most likely, or they'll have you in some sort of exhibition. So if you're doing that in Japan, they put the armor on you. You're just like this big imposing warrior. It might be a wrap. And Shozan Hanma brings up a very interesting point. So he basically attributes his very well-being to using his martial skills. Salute to you. That's
Yeah,
that's that's what it's about. This whole thing is about living life without fear, and the first step is training the body. So salute to you.
indeed, and even salute to J.J. Wilson. He
Salute
said
to
doing
JJ.
Taekwondo and everything.
I don't know if I want to mess with JJ though, man.
Nah,
Seem like
nah.
he could probably just tear the club up, like he just power up on a nigga.
JJ is definitely one where from afar I will be like, I respect him. So mutual respect.
Right. Right.
Indeed, indeed. So I did have one article that actually kind of ties into what we're talking about as far as the importance of meditation as a warrior. And it dives a little bit into Zen, but I do have another article that goes even deeper than that. But I figured this would be a good starter to kind of get the ball rolling, and actually kind of get further into the importance of meditation if you're going into the martial arts or any aspect of Japanese culture. So this particular article from the Task and Purpose channel is called "Why Some of the Most Hardcore Warriors in History Practice Meditation." So the article starts off like this. It says there is no surprise that the samurai class in Japan took to the practice of Zen meditation. It blended nicely with the needs and values of their materialistic lifestyle, particularly in dealing with the issues of facing death, but also more broadly with its inclination towards orderliness, order, ah, orderliness, self-discipline, and focus. Very useful tools in training for the martial arts. According to the DT, according to DT Suzuki, one of the greatest proponents of Zen Buddhism in the West, Zen appealed to the warrior with his insistence on moving forward 100% once a course of action has been decided. In other words, the warrior, either on the battlefield or on the training ground, does not let doubt or fear get in the way of the successful completion of an objective. Now, I will say, even just when I was practicing Taiko and Odaiko, one thing that my sensei, Odaiko sensei, really emphasized with me, he would tell me to do not think of striking the drum. Become one with the drum and just let your body move with the flow.
Hmm.
And it took me a while to really understand what he meant by that. But as I started to get more practice and really focus on the techniques, I understood that for a lot of people, especially like the American way and whatnot, even something as simple as playing the drums, you could think too much and try to come up with the next beat or come up with the next style and everything while you're playing. And for the sensei, he was telling me that don't worry about hitting the next move, just actually become part of the move itself. And to me, it's kind of like, I know we're getting a little bit further ahead, but it's pretty much like emptying the mind to where you're only focusing on what you have before you and how to use it intrinsically.
Mugen or Mugen, I think it's one of those. Mugen, I think it is. No mind. So, and this is why I wanted to kind of talk about that because, like the article mentions, Zen and the samurai were very closely connected. Um, there's also kind of a different school. So when we get through with this, now I want to kind of touch on it specifically Tendai Buddhism or Bukkyo,
Mm.
and that was kind of more of the shinobi's art, the Ninpo Mikyo, the hidden knowledge, if you will. But I think that in a lot of respects, a lot of this kind of bled over to one another. I don't think there was like a hard and fast separation. So um, for those in the Tendai school, they would basically say that Tendai Buddhism was basically one of the parent schools of Chan or Zen, which would come to Japan from China and Vietnam and other places. So um, I guess lately I'm kind of more focused on what is the synergy versus
Mm.
saying this belongs over here and that belongs over here. So I find that's a very limiting point of view.
Very true. Very true. And even that's something that I'm still kind of learning as far as not needing the means of separation. Um, to me, a lot of aspects in life could be incorporated or endowed from many techniques and many cultures. Um, but it's interesting as far as like with the Zen type, where it really talks about being of clear mind, being
Mm,
of emptiness per se. And it's interesting because some of the meditations that I do that's not Japanese related, it can actually still be incorporated in the Japanese lifestyle. To me, a lot of the East Asian culture, especially when you look from the Confucius style and the Buddhism style, it really incorporates the importance of nature and the importance of
mm,
becoming one with your surroundings per se. And definitely with you being a shinobi, it's definitely importance of being one with your surroundings when you have a task of gathering information and coming back in one piece. So
right.
that
One of
requires
the
true. Mhm, go ahead.
Um, oh, I'm sorry, bro. I was gonna say, so one of the secret sayings, not so secret anymore, of the Togakure school is family, country, and nature. In other words, you defend all three. So that definitely dovetails with your point.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the next paragraph says this. It says in samurai culture, the greatest warriors were expert swordsmen. Those who trained in Zen sought a state of no mindedness. In Zen, the empty mind is the free mind, and for a swordsman in the midst of combat, an empty mind freed him from doubt and fear, and the need for calculation or concentration on technique. Of course, they all trained constantly, seeking out the greatest teachers. But once real combat began, all thinking departed, and the purity of action took over. It's not something that can be learned in a day, but rather requires a lifetime of dedicated practice in both Zen meditation and swordsmanship. One could do without the other, but together they create a formidable synthesis.
Mm.
It's interesting because, and this kind of goes back to my football analogy, you know, as a former lineman and everything, it kind of became second nature for me in regards of if I was an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman. I didn't have to worry so much about did I get the techniques right and everything. It was just more so mano y mano at that time frame. As soon as the ball was snap, if I'm on defense, you know, I didn't think twice of my assignment. It just simply hit the guy that's in front of you and then shed him off to get to the ball carrier. And
Mm.
then if I was on offense, it was really a sense of, the guy that's in front of me, I'm not going to let him get past me. And, I didn't worry about techniques or am I doing this right, doing that right. Once I got on the sideline, the coach will be in my ear if I didn't do such and such technique right or block right. But it's like once you was in that moment in the game, everything about practice and training just went out the window and you literally just focus on beating the guy in front of you. And to me,
Mm.
that was before getting into the Japanese culture. That was my means of relating to what they're talking about, the Zen and the portions of the swordsmanship being synthesized. Because once you got into battle, you know, all the practice with swordsmanship and all goes out the window, and now you just need to execute what you know.
Yeah, that's and Evan Duncan was right. So it's Mushin, so no mind. I was thinking Mugen, which is empty-handed or without a sword. But I found that basically at one point in time in the beginning, I tried to train the body, but I didn't bring my heart and spirit into it. So I was struggling with like basic stuff.
Hmm.
So my Nimpo instructor, he is actually a Buddhist priest. So, we started working on, the mental and the spiritual aspects of it. And my technique improved fairly rapidly, actually, after that. Um, and, I find that, like you were mentioning earlier, some individuals might, look at you and say, "Hey, I don't want no problems. I want no drama." Um, I find I because the interesting part is when I was in high school, I fought pretty much every day. Because
Wow.
at that point in time, I was a buck 05 and a boss player, so so people were not happy with me about that. But when I started training, and this was like I was 18, I just graduated from high school, and I started training, no one ever wanted to fight me again. I was never in that situation. I've had to stare down a few people, and you kind of go into that state of perfect calm. You're like, okay, I'm kind of prepared for whatever. And when people kind of look at you and they realize that, oh, this is serious, a lot of times they back off. So I think that it's essential to bring those together. I don't know if anyone could really truly practice with the body but ignore the spirit. I'm not sure if that's even really doable.
Yeah, um, ab- absolutely. Because it's something you mentioned about having to stare down your opponents and everything. So I'm one where I definitely choose the path of peace um, in regards to nonviolence. If there's a means of escaping without having to really defend myself and everything, I will definitely take that route. But I will say that the only time that I've actually had to show my auras, or there's a Japanese word for as far as um, your presence being known and whatnot, is when I had to kind of have a stare down with some of the knuckleheads from the oppositions, and majority of them were Maggle types who,
Mm,
unfortunately, the ones who feel like they gotta show their manhood against other black men and whatnot,
mm.
especially against black men who don't act or look like the Maggle types. So I was kind of one where in high school, I didn't have to worry so much about fights and everything because being a big kid, alignment and whatnot. Not many of people gonna really try to take a one on one with a 5'10", 230 pound dude and whatnot. But it was it's something to where there were occasions where, um, so to speak, my metal was tested, and all I had to do was just simply have just, as my sensei would call, the emotionless look, where you can't tell what my expression is. You can't tell um, what I look like and whatnot. And Evan Duncan, they were not male jaggles; they were just maggles. The male version of the daggles, which the majority of them happens to be brothers of our skin tone. But the essence of that, having that emotionless expression, the poker face and whatnot, my sister is like, just having that expression could scare off anybody just by my appearance and all. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know I had something like that.
Well, I think when people are confronted, what was there's an anime that kind of put this perfectly. So I forget the name of it now, but basically, whenever people would see the dude, like they would see death and they would just run off, right?
You know
They
what?
didn't want the issues. What was that called? You probably know what it's called.
There was an anime, and I watched this some years ago. It was actually an interesting show. I want to say it's called Toriko.
Hmm. Come
It
on.
I may
Yeah,
have
I'm
to
trying to think
look.
of the name, but I mean,
Yeah,
it was cool because like the dude would like people would run up on the dude, like they were gonna do something to him. He would just turn around, look at him, and they would just they would see death and they would run away. Yeah, that's it. Baki. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Baki. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Like people would look at him and they'd be like, yeah, that's exactly. I mean, but in the Shoninki, which is one of the ninja manuals, fairly well known, the author basically talks about kind of developing that kind of spirit to where people just don't. They know better, and you don't have to be braggadocious about it, but they just know what the deal is and they leave you alone.
Yeah, very true. And to to me, yeah, it's just something to where I think once you have developed your abilities in the martial arts and whatnot, for some people it may come, through years of training and all, but for others, it just naturally a part of their presence, and all of a sudden, they're getting polished, you know, through martial arts and Japanese culture. So, I'm just digging on some of the things my Daiko Sensei was saying, as far as presence and whatnot. And this goes well into Zen, but the thing with Zen is it's all about clearing the mind, emptying the mind, and really just letting your body flow into its actions, whatever that action is being asked of. And so the next article, not next article, but the next paragraph says this. It says, in the military, service members are taught to consider all options before they act, to gather as much intelligence as possible and try to completely understand the opponent right from the beginning. To the Zen mind, too much thinking leads to doubt and paralysis, especially to someone in the middle of mortal combat. Better to move resolutely forward, forget one's ego, and complete the task at hand with the least amount of analysis and reflection.
Hmm.
Now, as someone who's a shinobi,
Hmm.
how would as far as when you're called upon a task, because especially when that task consists of matters of life and death, how would Zen be of importance for a shinobi in that regard?
That's a great question because I'm actually leaning more towards the service member approach in terms of like gathering and reporting information. But I think the context is important.
Hmm.
So, if it's my task to go to a town and, just gather information, just walking around, maybe I'm a tourist or traveling salesman or whatever, that's going to be a different thing than someone who's fully armored on the battlefield. So, usually, in most instances, the shinobi of old really didn't want to get into physical combat. He was more concerned with gathering and reporting information. And if he did have to get into a combat situation, he was usually the one that was initiating it. So that's kind of the dirty secret of um, Nimpo, is that we have a lot of defensive techniques, but we have a whole lot of offensive techniques,
Hmm.
like, how to take out a sentry, how to ambush someone from behind, stuff like that, which is kind of outside of the vein for most martial arts schools because they're typically defensive in nature. So, what I would probably say is, the thing about Nimpo is that you basically employ what's appropriate at the appropriate time. So
Hmm.
if I'm going to engage someone, I've kind of preloaded the information in my mind, and then I'm going to engage, and then I might basically apply like a Zen state at that point, but only long enough for me to do what I need to do. So I think that's kind of the way that that would get handled. We would kind of slip into that just long enough that it's appropriate, and then we go back to kind of that analytical mind, if you will.
Hmm. Soka, soka. Yeah, I'm definitely leaning on your expertise as far as most of the martial arts at the moment. I only have a little bit of understanding as far as some of the things that I know, but definitely the things that you have touched on, I think still apply whether you're going the shinobi route or the samurai route. I think the importance of understanding what the situation is, have some sort of a pre-plan, but then from
Right.
there, just let things happen the way it's supposed to happen. Going in with expectations, can definitely tear you from accomplishing what you need to accomplish because not every plan goes correctly. But understanding that you have some thoughts, but you're prepared if things go left or right, I think that is of utmost importance. Anybody going into the martial arts.
And I read I read that paragraph, and I'm thinking that pretty much everything nowadays, I'm thinking about it from a standpoint of unity. So what I would probably say is, I would take the approach of kind of thinking about all these different maneuvers and then kind of preloading it into the subconscious mind, and then going for it, at that point. So I feel like I probably wouldn't take a either or, it'd be more like a this and that. I'd probably try to synthesize the two, if that makes any sense.
No, no, it definitely makes sense to me. Definitely. Well, this article is almost wrapped up, so I'll go ahead and finish off with it. It says, with respect to death, and I find this particular paragraph interesting. With respect to death, Zen can become very controversial. For the Zen trained warrior, death is not something to be feared, as that fear can cause the type of paralysis which can be devastating to someone who experiences it. When we face an enemy and we fixate on the enemy instead of our training, the mind gets captured by the enemy even before the combat begins. In everyday life, if we fixate on our problems or on the behavior of others, our mind gets captured by these things and we're no longer free to act autonomously. Excuse me. For the Zen trained warrior, the thought of death is almost irrelevant. Victory or defeat are two sides of the same coin. Colleagues and foes are considered equal. Maintaining your Zen attitude is the most important outcome. Fist pumping your victory or disrespecting the enemy in his defeat are to be avoided. Meditation does not make problems go away. It allows us to face them with a completely different attitude. Meditation has nothing to do with finding God or training or traditional religious awakening, but it has everything to do with understanding how the mind works and how to become more enlightened and effective people by the practice of overcoming our own egos and the inherent weaknesses of our personalities. Now, that last two paragraphs, even if we was to remove the martial art aspect or even just some of the Japanese aspect to it, I like to look at it from the lens of an SYSBM practitioner. I think for a lot of brothers who are true practitioners of SYSBM, death for us is more like a new beginning. And what I mean by that is, I think once you have been awakened to the realities of the world, and especially the realities of things that go on in Ebony America or just Ebony folks, you're no longer concerned with the ways of the old life. That part of you died off. And now you become a whole new being and a whole new person, to where now you're no longer considered part of ebony culture. And I think for a lot of brothers who are practitioners of SYSBM, I think a lot of them can relate that they're not of the true ebony culture that they were taught when they were little and growing up. They're now a completely different type of ebony culture that is not based on fear, if I would say.
Hmm. There's a lot. That's pretty profound. I think that I used to read these books when I was a kid called The Death Gate Cycle, and that was like my favorite like high fantasy novel. And I was reading it, and one of the characters basically said that death can come as a friend.
Mm.
So I think that being aware of the fact that we are going to die, none of us is going to make it out of this alive. That's a powerful motivator. You know, a lot of the decisions I make are reflecting on the fact that we both have probably had a lot of people that we grew up with die or become very ill or get locked up, suffer civic death. And a lot of that is motivation to you know strike out and do something different, because I could be afraid to do something different. I could be afraid of being mocked and ridiculed and all these kind of things. But my understanding that death will come for me someday motivates me to make the decisions that I have to make. And there is something to be said about the old culture, it's powerful programming, and you've
Mhm.
got people in the tribe that they will kill literally to protect it. So if you're going to live this lifestyle, you're going to have to manage fear because it's not going to go away. But one has to kind of keep moving in spite of that. My master says often that if you stop moving, you die. So even though it may be uncomfortable, even though it might be out of my ordinary, plane of existence, I'm going to have to step out anyway, because if I stop growing and developing and learning, then I might as well be dead. So, you know, death and fear can be very negative aspects, and can drive people to do crazy things. But properly channeled, it can help you to do great things and not really look back.
That's very true. And it's something you mentioned how the opposition and the tribalists, they're willing to die to protect it. And to me, I find it interesting how, you know, their aspect, they're willing to die to protect, so to speak, their comfort zone, even though that comfort zone may be detrimental to their own development. Like your sensei told you, if you're not moving, you die. And to me, any culture that's not progressing and not being established into the future, it might as well just become a corpse.
A
And
diseased, rotting, zombified corpse.
you're saying, and to me, that fits well in line with what we're talking about because you know you do have some people on the opposition who will say that Kirigakure, why are you always learning? Why are you always doing something new and whatnot? Not realizing that as humans, you're supposed to continue to learn, especially in an ever changing environment. If you're not able to adapt to an ever changing environment, you're useless. Doesn't matter if it's the corporate world, the social world, families, communities, and everything. If you're not able to adapt to the change of time, then you will forever be stuck in that time frame. And you might as well just be dead from it.
Yeah. And as a shinobi, I think that our relationship with death might be a bit different than kind of the Zen ideal, because we all know the Hagakure, the way of the samurai is found in death.
Hmm.
We know that famous quote, but for a shinobi, his duty was to live because he had to complete the mission. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think there's kind of a difference in perspective, but even, famous samurai warriors, they're willing to, commit seppuku or to charge the enemy, but, for the love of their comrades or their country or their fiefdom or whatever, they were basically convinced to flee. So I think that it sounds like a cliche, but love is more powerful than fear. Love can even be more powerful than death. So the decisions I make, I do it because I love my family, my children,
Mm-hmm.
my family name, my honor, all these kind of things. So even if it's threatening to my life, or maybe there's a lot of fear and discomfort involved, I'm going to take that step because I really don't have a choice, because love kind of compels me forward, which again sounds a bit strange in light of the conversation that we're talking about. But the Tobacco saying is defense of family, country, and nature. So it's more than just sacrificing your life for your Lord, which, shinobi, plenty of them died for the sake of their employers. Let's keep it real. But um, as modern day loaning, I think that we should basically use these things like fear and death to push us forward and to keep us going, to achieve those goals that we want to achieve.
I agree. Death should not be seen as the setback, and especially if one sees it as the end of the life that they know it. Death should be seen as you're shedding the old and you're bringing forth the new. And even for some who looks at the physical side of death, see it as, well, hey, I'm leaving this world and this multiverse, however they see it, and going to the other side, whatever that belief may be for them. To be, especially for brothers who are doing something different and all, embracing that aspect helps to know that fear is something that is not within our mindset. Fear is something that is only for those who cannot progress forward. And for a lot of brothers who are true practitioners of SYSBM, it's very obvious that they're not living in fear because they're getting something different. They're doing something different. They're always in the constant motion of moving forward. To me, even just outside of the Japanese aspect, I think in a way, if you was to look at it, be like, wow, SYSBM brothers have more in line with the Japanese culture than they would ebony culture.
Yeah, no doubt, because and many days and nights I've kind of pondered this, but it really is, it is a dead, ossified culture that the members thereof, just like the Matrix, and they will kill to protect it, Neo. It's kind of like that. And from the outside looking in, it's like, guys, what are you doing? But they are so afraid to let this culture die that they will kill anyone else who threatens it. So I think that's like one of those, like you watching the fantasy movies, they go into the forest and they never come back, or they go into this cave and they get caught up with whatever. I think really it's really a cautionary tale when you look back on the tribe and you see how things are going, and they don't want to change.
Yep, and in the words of my late grand uncle, World War II veteran, he would say, and that would be the death of them. he was hardcore when it came down to realities of black folks. I
Yeah.
have some stories from him that definitely I would have to put that over on Free Speech Avenger because it's not safe for the children.
I see. And
But oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say one quick thing I wanted to touch on real fast,
Mm-hmm.
if I may. Hold on a second. Can I do this? Let's do that. Let's try this. Okay. Share.
Oh, cool. All right, just one moment. Bring that up.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about my strange fetish for shrine maid. I mean, that's not what I was going to talk about. No, in all
I will
seriousness,
say, I will say though, the one in the middle, her attire kind of puts me in the mind of Kagome, but subject
that's
for
right.
another day.
That's right. Well, I wanted to talk about just real quick before we get back to Zen,
Yeah,
is that
absolutely.
Japanese culture is an amalgamation of a lot of different things. People have said that it's basically like that the Japanese have a cultural stomach, so they'll take different cultures and they'll kind of mash it all up. But I think that we should also talk about Shinto because we talk about the tribe and the disease rotting zombified corpse of da community. um, the difference, or one of the differences, is that Shinto is a theme running in the background. So there's been some pretty interesting episodes in Japanese history relating to Shinto, Buddhism, Christianity, other religions. But there were some pretty serious Shinto Buddhist wars where you had people that were about the Shinto who were fighting against those who were introducing Buddhism. Maybe that's another story for another time, but I think that Shinto always runs in the background, and Shinto basically loves life. So, like when your children are born at a certain stage, you take your children to the jinja on, Oshogatsu, that first day of the new year. You go to the jinja, to the shrine, and you basically, say your wishes or whatnot for the new year. And in Shinto, typically they don't have funeral ceremonies. Those are usually Buddhist ceremonies. So, modern day Japan, of course, is a super technological country. But, if you watch their media, anime, manga, things like that, if you scratch the surface, like all this ancient traditionalism is going to come out, out of the middle of nowhere. So I think that the impulse for life is embedded in the culture. So even if you have a warrior that is practicing Zen, I think it's one of those things that, Zen has its place, but only a few people are going to really utilize Zen for like all aspects of their life. I think that this Shinto programming is running in the background. So I just thought that was something I wanted to mention real quick because Shinto is an interesting um, belief system. It's actually very similar to the Old Testament. Like if you read the Torah and like all the different rituals and cleanliness and all that kind of stuff, you'll find a lot of those practices in ancient Shinto as well. So I just thought that was worth a mention.
Oh, absolutely. And definitely we're going, by all means, in the series, we're definitely going to talk more on the religions of Japan and even do some solo section on Shinto and Buddhism and how it's those are deemed of importance in a world as technically advanced as Japan.
Yeah.
I just think of a time when believe it was either day one or day two. It was actually day two once I landed in Tokyo, but we met up with one of my Japanese friends who lived there, and the first place he took us was to the Asakusa Temple. And this is my first time, seeing the temple and everything, but it was also my first time actually seeing what Shinto was all about. Buddhism, I've seen a little bit of it, in regards to like Chinese Buddhism and South Asia's version of Buddhism and all. So I was somewhat familiar with some of their practices, but I never saw how Shinto was practiced until I got to Japan. And so it was amazing. My friend, he showed us around as far as what they do at the shrine, and even as far as some of the practices and all. He took us to there was this fire pit that was just outside of the Buddhist temple, and in this fire pit were essence that were being burnt and whatnot. And my friend told us like what you do is you dip your head and you allow the essence to burn into your soul. Now, at first, I was like, do I need to catch on fire or what? He was like, no, 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 no. It's just let the essence become one with you and all. So I did that and so to speak, let the essence kind of rub through my head and everything. And I have to say, like after that happened, I definitely felt something with my spirit. Like it was renewed in a refreshed kind of way and whatnot. And so that it was definitely an interesting experience, even from a spiritual standpoint. Just doing that, within the Asakusa Temple Shrine.
Mm. Yeah, that's I haven't been there in a long time, but yeah, there's something to be said. Like you can kind of feel. How do I want to say this? You can kind of feel the life. Does that make sense? Like you go to
Oh
some
yeah,
places and it's like dead. Like you can't really feel the energy there.
yeah, you're right. And it's something you mentioned because when I look at religion, I kind of look to see, okay, are people practicing religion, so to speak, from an identity standpoint of, they're not finding themselves and so they become like sheep to follow the herd and whatnot? Or do they practice religion from an enlightenment standpoint? And I will say that even at the Asakusa temple and the shrine and all, there was more people there who just felt more enlightened than what I experienced going to, so to speak, an ebony church. I'll leave it there in that regard. But I think, when you're talking about there was more life at
Life.
these temples and shrines, definitely I can concur. It was definitely a lot more people who were energized and were more at peace than I saw people who would go to these everyday American churches and they still feel like their issues haven't been solved.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's I mean, I can get really deep really quickly, but I don't know. And you probably maybe felt this too, but overall, I just felt like I had more life, more energy there. I miss it actually. My body kind of craves being in Asia. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh, you absolutely right. Like, it's something you mentioned, body craves Asia. I have to say, like, when I tell my friends and they ask me, how would I describe my first trip to Japan? And I would tell them, it's like, if I can make any type of essence of it, I truly believe that a part of my soul will forever remain in Japan. To me, that is pretty much saying that in order for my soul to feel connected once again, I gotta keep going back to Japan. Even if it's
Mm,
just for a few weeks trip and everything, I gotta still travel throughout the year over there and such. And the reason being is because that first trip literally, like, in my soul just changed forever. And coming back to America just feels like a part of it is empty. And I know it's empty because just coming from that trip, a part of my soul is still stuck in Japan. So I definitely understand what you're saying, how your body is craving going back. To me, my whole essence of my being, body, mind, and soul, is looking for the day when I do return back.
mm. So listening.
Yeah. Yeah. So this next article actually kind of delves deeper in how Zen has become part of the Japanese culture, more so when it comes down to the samurai culture. So this is from the learnreligions.com. It's called Zen, the role of Zen and samurai culture. So it starts off by saying this. It says one of the things everybody knows about Japanese history is that the famous samurai warriors were into Zen. But is that true or false? It's true up to a point, but it's also true that the Zen samurai connection has been hyped and romanticized out of proportion to what it actually was, especially by authors of popular books about Zen. So it goes into the historical background. It says samurai history can be traced back to the 7th century. By the 10th century, the samurai had grown very powerful and effectively controlled most of Japan. The Kumakura period, between 1185 and 1333, saw failed Mongol invasions, political upheavals, and civil war, all of which kept the samurai busy. Buddhism was introduced to Japan in the 6th century by a delegation from Korea. Over the centuries, several schools of Mahayana Buddhism were imported from mainland Asia, mostly from China. Zen Buddhism, called Chan in China, was among the last of these, reached Japan initially at the end of the 12th century in 1191. This first school of Buddhism in Japan was Rinzai. Another school, Soto, was established a few years later in 1227. So, what we can see here definitely is interesting just looking at the backdrop of how the history of Japan starts to kind of get formulated in these early centuries. And so Buddhism was actually already being imported into Japan by the 6th century. And then a century later, the samurai culture started to get developed and all. And so from this is where you start to see the first Buddhism of Japan, which is Rinzai, and then the next school being Soto, start to play a major role in the samurai culture that's developing.
Yeah, and I want to take a minute to talk about because they mentioned Mahayana. So
Mm-hmm.
there's basically three Buddhist schools. So there's Theravada, which is basically kind of the original Buddha teaching. Basically, it's good for like monastics. So you retire from the world and you basically, study and meditate and sit and do these kind of things. Mahayana is basically it's like for the common people.
Mm-hmm.
And then Zen, it being an offshoot of Mahayana, they don't really have a lot of the um, kind of the rituals, a lot of the iconography, and other things that Mahayana um, typically has. So you had various schools like the Tendai, you had Shingon, you had Pure Land sect, you had Zen. My mother-in-law is Nichiren Buddhist, and she spends a lot of time. The big thing for Nichiren is the Lotus Sutra. So they
Mm-hmm.
basically spend a lot of time, kind of chanting the Lotus Sutra. There's just a lot of, I mean, the history is fascinating, and there were a lot of warrior monks, and they grew to be quite powerful in their own right. And sometimes they competed with the samurai for power and influence. So just a lot happening there. But from a shinobi perspective, there's one more school that there's the Vajrayana, which is the Diamond Thunderbolt school, which is like esoteric Buddhism. It's kind of related to like Tibetan Buddhism. So from that particular branch, you have and Evan Duncan says the Shaolin monks. Yes, Chan or Zen came from Shaolin, and then also a lot of your Mahayana schools also kind of originated or came from Shaolin. And if you find pictures of Bodhidharma, which is the founder of Zen, they have him as a very darker complected, brother looking individual. So, there's
Yep.
that. Um,
Yep. I noticed that too a while back.
yeah, and so there's an interesting guy on YouTube, Anthony Amp Elmore. So like he's beefing with like the Soka Gakkai, which is basically like a lay Nichiren organization. But he makes the argument that Nichiren Soshu was actually a brother. So he's got some interesting videos on this topic on YouTube. So worth checking out at your convenience. But um, so the reason why I bring that up is that so traditionally, a lot of the ninja schools were associated with the Vajrayana, the esoteric side of Bukyo. So Zen would be a part of that, or the techniques that Zen really emphasized would be part of that. But there would be other things too, like mandalas, like hand motions, mudra. There's the kujikiri, all that kind of stuff that would be kind of preserved within the shinobi families. Not all of them, but many of them.
Soka. I'm definitely gonna have to definitely when we get back to talking more about Zen on later episodes, have to break up more of the shinobi side. I didn't know there was a third school in that regard. Wow, that's pretty interesting. Just hearing that. Um, definitely, I want to incorporate more of that shinobi side too, as far as how they incorporated the the Zen aspect in any sort of meditation and pure concentration. Um, that's interesting history right there.
I mean, basically, for the shinobi, they weaponized Buddhism, and
Hmm.
there's Shinto elements too. But basically, where Theravada is for the monks, Mahayana is for the people. Zen was very popular in the samurai class, but the Mikyo was the shinobi's military application of esoteric Buddhism. So you would use it to try to forecast the future, make your plans, kind of how you can get perspective. There's kind of looking at the world from the God's eye view, as they call it. And then there's looking
Hmm.
at the world from the human level. So you use it to kind of strategize. I mean, there's just a lot to it. And then a lot of your physical techniques, there are specific hand postures. We know the Kuchikiri from Naruto, but there are certain hand signs that one would use to basically call forth specific states of mind and consciousness. So the way I like to think about it is as an Orthodox Christian, the relationship between Zen and Ninpo Mikyo is a lot like the relationship between Orthodox Christianity and Protestantism.
Hmm.
It's not
What?
100% like that, but it's similar. There's just a lot more involved. Whereas, like say, Protestantism is more slimmed down. They've kind of pared away a lot of what they feel to be non-essential. So that's kind of the way I look at that relationship.
I haven't even thought of it that way, even just from the aspect of Catholicism versus Protestants. Yeah, it's interesting how even with those two religions, it may seem what's similar on the outside, but really when you study the deeper meanings behind those two religions, they're actually very different in how they approach their version of spirituality. So, wow, I haven't even thought of it that way. All right, so the next paragraph says late in the 13th century, samurai began to practice Zen meditation with Rinzai masters. The intensive concentration of Rinzai style meditation can be an aid in enhancing martial arts skills, and reducing fear of death on the battlefield. The patronage of samurai brought many perks to Rinzai. So many masters were happy to cater to it. Some samurai intensely engaged in Rinzai Zen practice, and a few became masters. However, it appears the majority of Zen practicing samurai sought the mental discipline to be better warriors, but were not so keen on the Buddhism part of Zen. Now, definitely find that interesting because when you actually read up more on Japanese culture and all, especially during the time of the samurai warriors definitely were ones where they appreciated the essence of meditation, but at the same time, it was almost like they were, I wouldn't say anti religious, but they definitely were not so devout in it unless it was more so in the Shinto type of practices and all. But the Buddhism side, not much of them really practice that unless, like you pointed out earlier, Kirigakure, they were part of the warrior monks, and the warrior monks are the ones that incorporated the whole essence of Buddhism into their lifestyle. Whereas the samurais, they were more so focused on just the Zen part. The religious aspect, they just kind of made it secondary outside of as far as their true essence.
I find that to be interesting because I think there was conflict between Shinto and Buddhism, especially at first. There were a lot of battles and wars over this very thing, a lot of political intrigue, um, because how do I want to explain this? So there were so many different Buddhist schools, and a lot of them really didn't get along like that. You had different monks that would introduce different teachings, and then some teachings were more zealous. Like Nichiren tends to be a bit more zealous in its approach than maybe some of the other schools. So I mean, there were skirmishes and wars and rebellions, and it's hard to really imagine today, because the Japanese people for the most part are pretty chill when it comes to religious stuff. So you probably heard the saying that the typical Japanese person is Shinto when they're born, Christian when they get married, and Buddhist when they die. But a lot of them don't really incorporate it in their lives like that. But for the ancients, that was a big deal. Like if you
Oh
read
yeah.
like Genji Monogatari, the tale of Genji, or Issei Monogatari, all those classic examples of Japanese literature. So and so, Princess so and so fell ill, and so Prince Sotoku commissioned prayers, and they prayed all day for Lady Awa or whatever. So my thought would be that some of I have great respect for Buddhism. I have great respect for the Buddha, Shinto, but I'm not a Buddhist anymore. I was a practicing Tendai Buddhist for quite a few years. And what I found was that I spent so much time sitting. Like I had someone relatively close to me that passed away, and I didn't feel anything, you know, like it didn't touch me. And that really bothered me. I said, well, I'm gonna start doing this, so I stopped,
Yeah.
because I realized for me personally that I wanted to feel. I wanted to, I didn't want to like sever my emotions. I wanted to feel my emotions and work with my emotions. So, oftentimes when we hear like Buddhist teachers in the West, again, great respect for the Buddha and his message, but um, there are some doctrines that some people would find rather disturbing, right? Some things that, if you're a warrior, you don't particularly have time to dwell on the 13 hells and the king of hell and being reincarnated as a grasshopper. You probably don't want to be thinking about all that in the middle of a war. So I could kind of see where that might come from. Plus, there is a lot of tug of war and back and forth between Buddhism and Shinto. And this article will probably speak to that, so I will stop talking.
Oh, not at all, good sir. Like I said, you're pretty much an encyclopedia right now on Japanese culture. I'm still, as they say, getting my feet wet and all. I'm even though I'm probably knee deep by now. Alrighty, so the next paragraph says, not all Rinzai masters sought the patronage of samurai. The Otokan lineage, named after its three founding teachers, Nampo Jomyo, or Daio Kakushi, 1235 to 1308, Shuho Myocho, or Daito Kakushi, 1282 to 1338, and Kanzan Egan, or Kanzan Kakushi, 1277 to 1360, maintained distance from Kyoto and other urban centers and did not seek the favor of the samurai or nobility. This is the only surviving Rinzai lineage in Japan today. Both Soto and Rinzai Zen grew in prominence and influence during the Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, when Zen made a huge impact on many aspects of Japanese art and culture. The warlord Oda Nobunaga overthrew the government of Japan in 1573, which began what's called the Momoyama period, 1573 to 1603. Oda Nobunaga and his successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, attacked and destroyed one Buddhist monastery after another until institutional Buddhism in Japan was under the warlord's control. The influence of Buddhism declined during the Edo period, 1603 to 1867, and Buddhism was replaced by Shinto as the national religion of Japan late in the 19th century. About that same time, the Meiji Emperor abolished the samurai class, which by then consisted mostly of bureaucrats, not warriors. So that's pretty interesting, seeing how the clash between Buddhism and Shinto, for that matter. You had Oda Nobunaga, who essentially he is considered the founding father of uniting Japan, all of Japan. And during his crusade, he instituted Buddhism to be the main religion of Japan. Then, as you go more into the Edo period and kind of go into the Meiji era, all of a sudden Buddhism starts to go into decline and is later on replaced by Shinto. And for that matter, it appears that Shinto is a lot heavily more influenced in today's Japan than it was back in early Japan. And then obviously, as it rightfully points out, once the Meiji era started going, the samurai class was already in decline. Um, During this time frame, there wasn't really any wars to be fought and whatnot. The only major war that happened during the Meiji era was the Boshin War, and we'll definitely talk more on that in another series. But it seems like after the Boshin War, which was Japan's civil war, pretty much the samurai class died off with Edo Japan and was replaced by the modernization that was the Meiji era.
Hmm. You know what? When I think about Japan, I think about the ability of the Japanese to basically turn a corner quickly when they need to.
Oh yeah.
So a lot of people like to talk about Japan being, you know, inflexible or, stuck in their ways and this, that, and the third. But I think it's because of the friction between Shinto, Buddhism, and of course Christianity, which would come later during this time frame. You have these different, ways of seeing the world compete with each other. You had factions, and I think this is kind of like my libertarian theory of government. Too much power in limited hands leads to stagnation. And I do think that it's the ability for Japan to pivot that saved them, because they're like one of only two countries in the world that have never been colonized by a European power. Like if you look at maps of like the late 1800s, you see like all these countries in the world that are basically dominated by European powers. Japan is not one of them, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that it's their national character, that Yamato Damashi, that saved them from that. And they were willing to fight in a different way because they knew they weren't able to go toe to toe with, Commodore Perry and the black ships. And they basically say, you know what, we're going to do something different. And
Mm-hmm.
they switched the game up. And even when it came to their kind of religious influence, because, like they talked about, these Buddhist monasteries weren't playing, they were filled with stone cold killers, and a lot of these, well, some of those temples had, territory in their own right. Also, quick fun fact, Oda Nobunaga is, I jokingly say, the sworn enemy of all shinobi, because it was Nobunaga that attacked Iga, no, Iga
Ah,
Prefecture. And
yeah,
then,
that's right.
yeah, because his son came to Iga first, and the shinobi drove him off. But then Nobunaga came back with the force, and basically, I think it was Tenshu Iga Noran, basically wiped out and kind of broke the back of the ninja. So after that, they became like very scattered, families that had to go underground to survive. So the joke is, if we ever see Oda Nobunaga, we assassinate him immediately. So
That is true. And it's something because and we talked about this on a previous episode how the Iga prefecture is actually where the shinobi lifestyle was born. Being that it was a small prefecture and all that was consisted mostly of farmers, they at the time had to defend themselves against clashing clans and whatnot, and so they were the ones who actually developed the foundations of the shinobi. So that's an interesting little tidbit of history there. good thing I'm
yeah,
not. Good
so
thing I'm not in alliance with Nobunaga.
right. Sometimes I feel conflicted because, like I'll see, people that maybe they have ancestry going back to that line and they're cool people or whatever, but that's just kind of the running joke, But I mean, the thing is that the ninja families had tremendous influence of their in their own right. So I think the idea was basically to centralize power. And so Nobunaga, rightly, because you can't have these, rogue Buddhist temples, you can't have these rogue shinobi. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the shinobi were not happy because Nobunaga destroyed some of those temples. So the shinobi basically considered themselves to be the guardian of a lot of those religious temples and shrines. So for the shinobi, religion and spirituality was extremely important. So I think sometimes today, um, people separate that, which I think is not a good idea. Like I am a religious person,
Mhm.
but I'm also analytical. I depend on my intuition, but I also, accept information from other sources. So a shinobi basically is going to do what is appropriate at the appropriate time. And as Soke Hatsumi says, there is something above martial arts alone, meaning, the spiritual life. So I think that to be a successful shinobi, you have to incorporate all of those different aspects and not neglect them, because when you neglect your connection to the spiritual side, that actually makes you weak and easy to be manipulated and controlled.
Very true. And it's something you mentioned about how Japanese are so quick and flexible to adapt. It just reminds me of that incident um, that led up to the surrender of World War II. They call it the Kyujo incident that happened a few nights before the Japanese announced their surrender. Now, keep in mind, during this time frame, you're looking at a country who they were ready to die to the bitter end. You had women and children who were being trained to use weapons at home, in the schools, and whatnot, just in case the Americans were able to touch land on the main islands of Japan. But then, after the Kyujo incident, which, shout out to my other co host, Logic Finest, we will definitely touch on that later on in our series, The War Room. But after the Kyujo incident, the NHK radio station played what's called the the Voice of Jules, which was actually the recordings of Emperor Hirohito, as he was reading the surrender notice to all of the people of Japan. And after he made that speech, and a lot of historians made notice of this, the Japanese people literally changed overnight.
Yeah.
It's just like all of a sudden they went from a people who were ready to die and defend their homeland to the bitter end to all of a sudden it's like, you know what? Let's seek for peace and we'll build each other up afterwards, after this mayhem. And it was just like, despite the carnage, despite the detrimental aspects that happened to them leading up to the surrender, it's like as if they completely forgot about it and were just like, okay, well, we'll take the loss and we'll just build ourselves right back up. To me, I have yet to see anywhere in history where a people literally change their mindset as a nation overnight. Nothing has come in comparisons to Japan in that regard.
Exactly. And so this is why people kill me with the argument that if you change your mind, if you adapt different tactics, that there's something wrong with that. Like when we deal with the tribalists, they say, why are you doing something different? Why don't you come back here and stay on this plantation and, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, no, I know that, the Japanese decided to, hey, this thing ain't working. Let's do something else. And they're like, cool, we with it, and that's just who they are. And I think that Zen has a part to play. They were like, okay, well, we're going to let bygones be bygones. We're just going to move forward. So, I like to think of it as the cultural stomach. So, they've basically absorbed these particular, thoughts and beliefs and experiences, into the DNA. And it just produces this very unique culture. I mean, if you compare Japan to anywhere else in Asia, it's a completely different story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I've yet to see any country on a scale like Japan, if not bigger, who literally changed almost all aspects of their way of life overnight to adapt to, the changing times and the changing environments. Didn't mean that they forgot about the past and whatnot. Oh no, but they understood as a culture during that time that if they wanted to move forward into the future, there's some changes that collectively everybody has to make. And to me, that grand of a scale within a few days, yeah, to me, that's what kind of paints more Japan as mystical, even in my eyes, because it's like you're not going to be able to find something like that in history. And like you rightfully pointed out, you look at any other countries in Asia, they didn't have that much of a national influence amongst its people compared to how the Japanese treated themselves. Like, truly phenomenal.
And this might be a bit controversial to say, but this is why so many countries got their buttocks kicked by the
Mm-hmm.
Japanese. They came in, guns and swords ablazing, and there were definitely atrocities committed. We can't overlook that. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, if I'm ruling a nation, we'll call it Wakanda, right? We'll just mythicize it. So if I'm ruling Wakanda, you better believe I've got my what is it? What do they call them? The hounds. I'd have my hounds in every country looking for the newest innovative technologies, and I would be keeping up with stuff. And a lot of these countries, they're like, well, we're thousands of years old, and no one can do anything to us because we haven't fought a war in 3,000 years. No, that's not how this thing works. So when people kick in the door on you all of a sudden, you get caught slipping. I mean, it is what it is. So I just think that the Japanese were very mindful of war and things of that nature, and they say, you know what, we can't deal with these steam ships and these naval guns, so we're going to stall for time and upgrade our own society and culture. And unfortunately, a lot of other countries just didn't do that. So it is what it
Yeah,
is.
I would definitely say Wakanda should definitely take a lesson from Japan, but subject for another day.
Right.
All right, so let's finish up. So this talks about the samurai Zen connection in literature. It says in 1913, a Japanese Soto Zen priest and university professor who is lecturing at Harvard wrote and published Religion of the Samurai, a study of Zen philosophy and discipline in China and Japan. Among other inaccurate claims, the author, Nukariya Kaiten, 1867 to 1934, wrote that as regards Japan, it, meaning Zen, was first introduced into the island as the faith first for the samurai or the military class, and molded the characters of many distinguished soldiers whose lives adorn the pages of her history. As I've already explained, this is not what happened, but a great many popular books about Zen that came along later uncritically repeated what Nukariya Kaiten had said. The professor must have known that what he wrote was not accurate. Most likely, he was reflecting the growing military fervor of his generation that eventually would lead to the war in the Pacific in the 20th century. Yes, Zen influenced the samurai, as it did most of Japanese culture and society for a time. And yes, there is a connection between Zen and Japanese martial arts. Zen originated in China's Shaolin Monastery, so Zen and martial arts have long been associated. There's also a connection between Zen and Japanese flower arranging, calligraphy, poetry, notably haiku, bamboo flute playing, and the tea ceremony. But calling Zen the religion of the samurai is going overboard. Many of the great Rinzai masters, including Hakuyin, had no notable association with samurai, and there is little connection between the samurai and Soto. And while many samurai did practice Zen meditation for a time, most weren't all that religious about it. So, quick fact, in my Odaiko training, I've also learned a little bit of how to play the bamboo flute. Now, I'm definitely not good at it. That's a totally different instrument to play and whatnot. But it's an interesting type of instrument. The sound quality from it and all is definitely different compared to the metal version of the flute that the Americans and the Europeans play. So when I was reading that, talk about how it's incorporated into other aspects of Japanese life, like calligraphy, haiku, and then the bamboo flute and the tea ceremony. Now, I will say this: I had a chance to play at a festival, Japanese festival here in my local town, and for us, our sensei had us wear this type of attire where we'll have our white I want to say it's like a white it's not long like a kimono, but it's kind of like short, maybe like halfway between your kind of like your midsection up to top, and then everything at the bottom we have like somewhat similar to like a shinobi type of pants, and so we wear those with our shoes and everything. And I'm running and everything out in the sun, sweating and whatnot. And there was an occasion. Now I don't know if these women were Japanese or anything, but they were part of the tea ceremony. Ladies that help out with tea, and
Hmm.
they came. Three of them came over to me to offer me some tea. I was not I was not used to that, but that was kind of interesting. My first encounter, as far as with the tea ceremony type of gal, so I definitely want to put that out there.
Yeah, I remember I was in Kinkakuji in the Golden Pavilion in Kyoto, and they
Mm.
have like a tea area there, and tea was on point. Like it had flavor, it was kind of sweet. But basically, yeah, the temple, they sold the tea. Um, I believe young Hinata is versed in tea ceremony. I know she can do some other things like origami and ike ikebana, like flower arranging. But I'm
Mm.
not sure if she's skilled in tea ceremony. I have to ask her. But I mean, I think that Zen has some. I mean, it definitely has some lasting influences. So, for example, I think that Japanese people they tend to have very strong powers of concentration. So, young Hinata, when she sits down and start working, she'll just work and work and work and work and work, and it could last hours. She doesn't talk a whole lot. She's just basically focused on getting stuff done. And I've done my fair share of Zen-esque, just kind of like insight meditation,
Mm.
where I'm trying to like just focus on the breath. And I've had some interesting experiences with that. But I think what happens is that they absorb these things, and it's just like all part of the national character. So I can definitely see the influence that Zen has upon kind of the normal everyday lifestyle, and especially when it comes to like their attention to detail and how they can just focus on a task for a long time. I think definitely Zen has something to do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the aspects that I get from a lot of this meditation. So even I'm starting to incorporate a little bit more of Zen in my meditation. But one of the things that really helps me in regards to really becoming one with nature and clear the mind is really going out into nature. Um, one of my favorite aspects is hiking, and being in the desert area or whatnot. You thinking of a place that on the outside look like doesn't really have much life to it, but as you go hiking in this environment at all, you see that life flourish like nothing. It the animals that come out and everything, and the birds that fly around in the heat and whatnot. And as you hiking, you really start to become part of that nature, and it really starts to clear your mind the higher up you go. And so, depending on the type of areas you go to, some like to go down to the ocean or the beach, some like to go into the forest or any type of mountain areas and all. But I think once a person finds that place of silence, that's where they really start to let the mind flourish and renew itself, and really kind of delving more into that aspect of Zen meditation. You know, just something that I experienced on my side.
I was thinking about that. One day I'm sitting, it's like a few of us guys and my teacher, and I look up at my teacher and I'm going to ask him a question. And then he just grabs like a tea whisk and just throws it at me. And he
Whoa,
hits me like dead in the face.
whoa.
And he had this look on his face. And then he went back to meditating. And so did I. So that was a very Zen kind of thing. Basically, what he was trying to tell me is that I need to focus, but he didn't necessarily want um, to verbalize it. I was supposed to know without knowing what he meant. Um, there's like a story about like how Zen came into being. So basically, the legend goes that the Buddha lifted up a flower, and the only one of his disciples who actually got the memo, there's like one guy who understood what he meant. And this particular disciple, I forget his name, this disciple went off and ended up founding Zen or Chan in China. So um, the
That's
tribalists will often say, "Go ahead, brother. I'm sorry."
Oh no, I was gonna say that's still an interesting story. That really kind of sounds like um, what my my girl would say, as far as they call it key, where just
Hmm.
knowing without verbally saying. It
Right.
sounds like that was a lesson that your sensei taught you right then and there, even though from the outside it was very dramatic.
Well, and here's the thing about that. I could have rose up in anger, right? I could have said, "Oh, I don't want to take this. We are gonna take it." You know, um, I could have got butthurt about it, right? I could have done a number of things, but I knew what he was trying to tell me without me necessarily having to ask a bunch of questions or me going to a big emotional, issue about it. So when we talk about sometimes this SYSBM experience and what it's like, we can't really tell you what it's like. You just have to experience it. It's like a cone, like um it's very cliche, but what's the sound of one hand clapping, that kind of thing. Um so our experience, I mean, we can verbalize it, but you're not really going to get it until you get out there and hike and discover it for yourself.
Very true. Very, very true. And I think that also once once you get into that type of environment, because you did a video not too long ago, or stream per se, where you talk about brothers going out into the wilderness and really enjoying that aspect of being one with nature. To me, that really highlights and hits home where I think for a lot of brothers, especially if they're practitioners of SYSBM, finding that sense of tranquility, outside of human contact and everything, when you go off to nature and you really delve into the quietness and the dynamics of the life within nature and all, that's when you really kind of appreciate life even more so. Um, a lot of our oppositions and the tribalists that we sometimes have to deal with and all, they will call us, dark white because, oh, you like to go hiking. Oh, you like to go to the beach and everything, or you like to go into the forest or the wilderness. Not realizing that even just doing something as basic as that will help to clear your mind of the irrationalities and the dysfunctions of some human interactions. And to me, I think that you're doing yourself a disservice if even from that aspect you're constantly delving in irrationalities and dysfunctions without allowing your mind to literally clear itself out to refresh and redevelop itself.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, when you leave the tribe, when you step outside of the black box, you do stuff like that. I make it a point to spend at least an hour every day, outside in nature as much as possible. 'Cause my job is high stress and things are happening or whatever. So it kind of helps me to refocus. But I mean, if you think about, if you live in an area where, if you go outside, you get shot, nigga,
Mm.
you mean your opportunities for nature may not be all that great. So yeah, I mean, I just felt like life, how do I want to phrase it? Life in the tribe is extremely limited because they're like on a 355, 3 by 5 plot of land in the middle of nowhere, the concrete jungle. There's no trees or beauty or sunshine. And, as the tribalists look at us from where they are, we're the strange ones in their opinion, in their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a warped perspective, but it's like was said in the scriptures, let the dead bury the dead. Can't do much for them.
You know what? That funny how that scripture even ties in with Zen. Let the
Yeah, right.
dead bury the
Bury
dead.
the dead.
Like,
Yeah.
hey, if you fear death, we'll let the dead bury you.
And I guess one last thing, um, I mentioned I spent, let's see, I spent 4 years as a practicing Tendai Buddhist, and I was real gung ho. I did a lot of meditating, a lot of chanting, a lot of reading of the sutras. When I picked up the Bible again and started reading it, a lot of stuff made sense. When I started going through it again, I said, "Wow, I didn't know. I didn't think about that. Whoa, this jumps out." So I mean, there's a lot of things that, um, even I read the Bible now, there's a lot of stuff that jumps out at me, because of that background and those experiences, and especially when I think about like what happens at Shinto shrines and things like that. I feel like I'm reading Leviticus or something like that. So it's interesting how you can get these observations, then bring them back and apply them to something that maybe you've been around or seen or read your whole life and get new insights out of it.
So true. So very true. And even now, like, yeah, I consider myself a spiritual person. I would say my my spirituality may be somewhat line up more with the Messianic teachings and all. But even when I went to Asakusa for the first time and went to the Asakusa temple, it was like right after that experience, my whole different aspect of spirituality actually increased for the better. And like you
Mm,
said, how, after your time of practicing Buddhism and all, your understanding of the Bible actually increased. For me, even so, in that regard too, like my understanding of religion and how it's important to seek spirituality for yourself and not
yeah.
try to, um, so to speak, be a sheep and let religion, be your main identity and everything. That only got awakened right after that session I had at the Asakusa Temple. And
Mm,
just going there, knowing the Shinto shrine, and then going to the Buddhist temple and how the proper way to pray and everything. Like, that actually increased my understanding of spirituality. And, I have to, once again, thank Japan for that enlightenment.
yeah, it's interesting because it's not in your face, but it's always there in the background. And so kind of the more that you understand it, the better you're going to be able to unlock the culture. Because a lot of these things that we are encountering as we go through the land of the rising sun are deeply spiritual. Even the Hinomaru, the Japanese flag, we've got Amaterasu, the rising sun, then,
Mm-hmm.
and, maybe that's another live stream we should do someday. The, uh, shoot, what's it called? The Kojiki? Let's see.
I
Yeah,
know
the
it's called
Kojiki and
yeah,
the
the Kojiki.
Nihongi. Yeah, and Nihongi. Yeah, basically, kind of the traditional legends and stories, because there's a lot there too, to unpack.
Uh,
So,
Actually, it's something you mentioned because next month, being as the month of October, I definitely want to touch up more on some of the folklore of Japanese culture. I think it will fit right into uh, some of those aspects that we're talking about right now. So that's definitely for the audience to stay tuned for that coming up. But even then, like I feel we'll have many more episodes where we're going to expand on the true meaning behind the rising sun flags and the modern flag and everything, and how those intertwine with the Japanese culture and all. So
mm.
yeah, I'm definitely on board for that. All right. Well, with that stated, that concludes this particular episode. And rest assured, we're just touching the iceberg on Zen meditation and all. So don't think that this is the last episode that we do on Zen. We definitely got more to go. And especially after hearing some enlightenment from my shinobi brother Kirigakure, there's other types of meditations that the shinobi do that's even different from the samurais type of meditation. So people, we barely touching the surface on this. We still got many ways to go. But with that being stated, my good friend and brother Kirigakure, you have the floor as far as the final words.
All right, Osamurai-san, thank you so much. So yeah, hopefully this was an interesting episode, and I wanted to bring this up because I think that it's good to understand the underlying belief systems for Japan and the Japanese culture, because I think that will help to explain why they believe and act the way they do, what's important to them, and why. I think that's very important for understanding. And it will also benefit you. It'll benefit your own life because a lot of these principles are timeless and universal. So that's really all I had. Thanks for having me on, and we will definitely kick it on the next one.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to the audience out there, I want to thank you all for tuning in during this live stream, and I'm pretty sure we'll have more that will listen in on the replay. But definitely one thing I will leave with y'all is if you're having a tough time in life and dealing with some busy aspects or personal aspects that are kind of, you know, maybe draining you and whatnot, definitely look into meditation. And definitely, if you want to be serious, Zen will surely help to clear your mind on a lot of aspects. It's helped me out. It's helped Kirigakure out. We have many more brothers out there who practice Zen or other forms of meditation. Um, One thing I would say is your health comes first. Before you can help anybody, you got to make sure that your health is in good condition as well. And that should be something that's practiced on everybody's time frame in mind. And so, with that said, I am Sigma Jones and my co host here, Kirigakure Jones. We thank you for tuning in to the Black Ronins of Japan. Until next time.